All right, so a big welcome to everyone, and thank you for being here tonight and this morning, Saturday morning in Australia. But we're now coming towards the final passages or the final sequences of the Gospel of Mark, and essentially we've worked our way through those initial descriptions of Jesus' ministry, which had so much to do with the overcoming of demons, which we understood as the internalized or introjected violence of the world, and especially the world as controlled by Rome at that time, and what an assault and an outrage that was for the sensibilities of the Judean people, given their history, given their Bible, their understanding the covenant and their relationship with God. It was a permanent shock to them to have the Romans occupying their land, and to such a degree it resulted in this catastrophic war 30 years after Jesus died. But that's the context in which we read the gospel, the initial passages and sequences of the gospel of Jesus casting out demons, and the figure, the motif of the Lake of Galilee as this physical metaphor in Jewish culture for an area that's untamed, and is the place which echoes or which lives off some kind of primordial violence, that in the mythologies, God had the god of the Phoenicians, for example, the god of the Canaanites had conquered. And of course, that's not the faith of the Jewish people as such, but there was still this sense that the sea, the waves, the depth, the deep, symbolize this undertow, or this level of creation which was not entirely submitted to God and to God of the Bible, the God of justice. And in Daniel's prophecy especially, it's from there which these empires, these incredibly destructive empires ending up with the Romans, emerge as beasts. So we have always said that Jesus chose the Lake of Galilee very deliberately as a physical metaphor of what he was doing, which was intervening at that depth in human affairs to bring about the deepest possible change, not just the change on the land, shall we say, in terms of the situations which law can govern, or with law to some degree can govern, but this depth in human existence, which is what we learn from Gerard, is it's the violent origins, or the generative power of violence, which has given rise to humanity. So Jesus is intervening very deliberately, and the trope, should we say, of the Sea of Galilee is not accidental. It's not just purely geographical, or kind of like with tourist value, that it makes the place look that it's a seaside, or it's something bordering on the sea. No, this is very deliberate on Jesus's part, that he goes to that area, and so he intervenes at that level. And the first chapters of Mark carry you through that, and then you have the murder of John the Baptist, which erupts out of that, and we can see how the murder is carried through by the crowd in Herod's court. And then we move to the multiplication of the loaves, two instances of that, in which Jesus offers this kind of entirely new set of relationships, which people don't understand. They can't get. The disciples are not understanding it at all, and they show themselves as absolutely non-understanding, non-perceptive about what Jesus is saying. And so they don't come across well. They don't come across as successful figures in the gospel. Jesus seems to be struggling with his disciples. And then we have these two teachings, one on marriage, and we went through that really, and Jesus' radicalization of that because of the role of women as being in that culture, that time, as being expendable. And Jesus gives this incredible status to women by saying, there's no possibility of divorce. What Moses did was because of the hardness of your heart. And then he moves on. Then we move to the situation of the rich young man. So that brings us right up to date with what we've been doing in the gospel. And we ended up with the rich young man going away sad because he was very wealthy. So along with the structures of violence, Mark indicates wealth as an obstacle to entering into the kingdom. But what we want to just look at briefly today is the reaction. We didn't talk about that last time, but it's the reaction of the disciples and Jesus' reaction to their reaction. And so at verse 28, so that's where we are now in chapter 10, verse 28, where Peter begins to say to him, look, it's very, very characteristic of Peter, to respond very directly and from his guts. Look, we have left everything and followed you. And then Jesus says, truly I tell you, there is no one who has left house or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for my sake and for the sake of the good news, the gospel, who will not receive 100-fold now in this age, houses, brothers and sisters, mothers and children and fields with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. So there's this direct response by Jesus to his disciples who claim through their mouthpiece, Peter, look, we've given everything up for you. So there's this list of stuff. There's no, if you've left houses, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, fields, your way of life to follow me, you will get 100-fold. So that has always been a very important part of the gospel for me, and a very real part of it, because I don't think the writer Mark could have written that unless it had been existentially true that they'd begun to experience the kind of 100-fold of the gospel, this overflowing bounty of relationships that flows from the gospel, and including material and economic stuff. It opens up an entirely new world. The world that, as we know it, is founded upon the defense of property, or that's one of the key elements in the world as we know it, that this is our land, we defend it. And if we want to take land, we're going to have to kill to do it, which we know is the pattern of human history. But what Jesus is saying, he's breaking in. If anybody's left all that stuff, then the world opens up with an entirely new set of relationships that frees up that material substructure, should we say, underpinning of human life, and gives and increases it actually economically by 100-fold. So it's like, like it's every politician's dream policy. They said, like, economic growth here is not going to be 3%, 4%. It's going to be 100% annually. Like, of course, it's ridiculous from a political point of view, but it is not ridiculous from the perspective of what the kingdom of Jesus makes possible once those initial breaks are made. And that's part and parcel of the whole ongoing experience of those who take the gospel really seriously with their whole lives, like Francis of Assisi is a wonderful example, and so many others that create, that expand the universe, expand the human universe exponentially, so that people begin to live with so much more freedom and so much more openness and so much more possibility. So along with, this is a kind of a bit of a turning point in the gospel that I sense here, that the disciples have shown themselves to be remarkably obtuse as to what Jesus was trying to do. And more often than not, Jesus is pushing back against them or slapping them down. But right now, he opens to them this panorama of freedom and basically wealth, human relationships, and also physical and economic possibilities. And I'm not talking about the prosperity gospel. I'm talking about my own experience of God honoring things that I've been involved in, and giving openness to new possibilities, always doing that. So what we're looking at is the immense generosity of the kingdom, and that's something I wanted to underline to begin with. That there is this, what Jesus is introducing into the world is a whole new human order that we've only just basically touched the surface of. And the hundredfold is that language which comes up in terms of the harvest early in the gospel, the sowing of the seed. Some the good seed, some bears 60, some bears 70, and some bears 100-fold. It's the language of the most successful possible harvest. That is offered or promised, not offered, it's promised to the disciples. So it's something very important to bear in mind, that this is so far in the gospel, it seems like the disciples are not getting it. But then Peter says, look, we may not understand you, Jesus, but we did what you asked us to do. We left houses and lands and brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers, families and all that. We left it all so that we could follow you. And he says, right, yes, you did that. And now I'm saying you're going to get 100-fold. And I'm pretty sure that had not been existentially, it had not been missed in the communities and in the community. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, I just think that it's true because it says with persecution, so it seems to be
Yes,
be addressing the early Christian community, doesn't it?
Right.
The gospel writer, and so both things must have been experienced, both the persecution and the breakdown of certain relationships in order to embrace the gospel.
Yes.
But then and paying that price, but then also true that they must have experienced the blessing.
100-fold. Yeah.
And I think we've all probably had experiences of that in our own lives, so we know what what that experience is.
Oh yeah. I
You
mean,
know, not in terms of worldly success, but in terms of feeling the blessing or the touch of the goodness of God in our lives,
yeah.
and the pearl of great price and all that kind of stuff.
So what you're hearing is, I think, is the reflection in concrete human existence. Once you've broken free of the containing structures based upon generative violence, no matter how, in fact, that does favor life. It allows the human species to survive and to grow and to cover the earth. What Jesus is saying is that there's a breaking free from this, and this reflects the generosity, the essential character of God as overflowing generosity.
Mm-hmm.
That
Grace.
as grace, that we didn't understand that before, but now once that pattern is established, that's as Linda says, that's the character of grace. Is this exponential, unlimited generosity of God in the world, and for those who, for everyone really. And
I,
but
and I
only,
think that
go ahead.
I think that's the sort of the motor, like that's the cycle that undoes the whole mimetic rivalry of the world system, because with unlimited poured out grace, there is no need for
No, that's right.
rivalries, and so it both creates what it creates and
Well, the
reflects.
answer.
It pours out grace on everyone, and that frees people up. It frees people from the world system, because you're liberated from that rivalry, that need to be in competition, and so you can start seeing people not as rivals but as people, you know. And so then it grows. It then builds the grace. Becomes generative in that sense, you know.
Right. I mean, and I wanted to underline that. Thank you for that, Linda, because I think the gospel is shifting here. You know, like it's very demanding up to this point, and the disciples show themselves to be uncomprehending. But then there's this shift of the hundredfold, and the same shift follows up in the story that follows, and we'll see that in a minute. But the last verse in that passage there underlines the reversal, that this is not just a new it's not a new territory for you to take over. It's not it's not like the new world for you to expand into. You can't bring the old world into it. It says, but many who are first will be last, and the last will be first. It really is the overturning of the world order. And that's what, and Marcus seems to always struggling with that, always struggling with the world order, in order that the disciples understand this is the condition, this is the necessary condition for entering into this new space. It's the overturning of the world order. And we'll see that underlined as we go forward. But does anybody have any comments on this? You know, this progression of the gospel up to this point, and this announcement of the hundredfold.
Could I
Go
make
ahead,
a
Andrew.
Yeah, I was curious. This isn't going to encompass the entire gospel and the progression we've made, but just this one line about the hundredfold. Would it be possible maybe to think some of Gerard's mimetic triangles, and we have mediators and objects, and the idea being that your house, your brothers, your sisters, or your, I mean, house, or maybe I kind of want to say home, but your brothers, your sisters, your mother, your father, they, if they're objects, there's someone who's mediated to you how to love your brothers and sisters, you know, how to honor your father and mother, how to live at home, how to, and so like that mediator doesn't go anywhere. And so even if you've lost them, there's always someone else you can love like a sister and honor like a father, you know, and you're not losing because of, I don't know. I was just curious if maybe the Girard's mimetic triangle can help us make sense of this like multiplicity of objects, because when we hold on, we grasp something, it's not actually the object, the mediator that's showing us how to hold whatever object might be before us.
So are you saying, Andrew, that necessarily therefore there is a new mediation?
No, what I'm saying is the implication being that it seems like that the disciples' question implies that, well, we've let go of all this stuff, and the response might be, I'm foisting stuff onto what Jesus is saying, so maybe it's not the case. But if the disciples' question is about, well, we've given up stuff, and his response is, yeah, but what you've kept is your mediation. Like, in as much as you love
Okay.
brothers and sisters, there's a multitude of brothers and sisters in the faith that you can love in the same way. You haven't lost the opportunities to love. And the same with being at home. Maybe you're not in the same place that you were, but because of the reign of God and how it's come to earth, like there are homes to be had any and everywhere that you're, and so that the mediation is consistent. Yeah.
But there is the possibility, even though you may have actually geographically given up those things, you may still have them as mediators and who establish the value for you. What you're saying is that actually Jesus is saying, no, actually, there are many other people who can mediate for you, and mediate a world of love, a world of open bordered relationships. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. That's it. I guess I'm assuming that the disciples aren't hip to the fact that they don't see their brothers and sisters as mediators yet, even though I'm sure they are. But like if the older brother's the mediator on how to farm your land, and you're like, I gave up my farm and I don't have my farm anymore, but all the lessons your brother taught you are still with you, and you'll be able to help. And like if for any object you've lost, there is still a mediator that is still with you.
Well,
Yeah,
that's a powerful point. And that's why brothers and sisters are all part of it. It's not just the lands and the houses. It's the family system that you've given up, or that Jesus is inviting you to give up, in order that you may have this much wider and richer and deeper assembly of mediators. Yeah, that's powerful, Andrew. Thank you. Welcome, Sheila. It's good. So we have 3 Australians with us now. That's wonderful.
Apologies, David. I was telling you, a few difficulties.
Oh, you did. Are you okay?
I'm late. Yes.
Okay. So Cheryl. Cheryl, go
Carol
ahead.
and then David.
Okay.
So as I was reading this time, I've always probably lazily read this statement by Peter, look, we've left everything and followed you, as like we did it voluntarily. And it may not have been voluntary. Like it may have been that they were expelled, from their home communities because of their act of following Jesus. Because it seems to me like anytime that I've tried to keep my feet in 2 different communities that have opposing forces, I'm expelled from one of them for sure. And so, I mean, there could be some pain in this. Peter began to say to him, look, we have left everything and followed you. And this has not been an easy leaving. And, we've left children behind and we've left families behind. Maybe the family said you have to go. And I just wanted to put it out there as a perspective of a different way of reading this. And the words that Jesus then says are actually a little comforting, as well as hopeful, that yes, this did happen to you, and yes, you've done this to follow me, and yes, you will find it's just like people who have their created families wherever they are. You have found a created family that accepts you and loves you and will be a part of your life forever. So just like this group, you know, could be that kind of a created family as we leave behind the mimetic structures of our religions or our backgrounds or whatever. So anyway, I thought I thought I'd share that reading.
No, thank you, Cheryl. I mean, that thought did cross my mind that we are the brothers and sisters that were promised, you know, like even, and the very fact that, you know, that we are in different continents kind of fulfills that, you know, that we've stretched beyond the locality, and that is part of the Christian promise. David, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just following up on what Cheryl and Andrew both were getting at, I think, or maybe I'm going in a new direction. It seems to me, and this is the part that excites me the most, that there's a transformation in the offing here that is the meaning-making processes in our hearts and understandings. Like, we have this opportunity to become more like God. God offers this extraordinary grace to everybody. We are contained by the evolutionary process that has formed us as human beings. And so we understand ownership, we understand defense, we understand how to protect ourselves and all that sort of stuff. But we can become even more like God. We can become these generous people. We can have the meaning-making processes of our hearts so transformed that our desires change, that we're not, you know, wrestling with ourselves anymore about this, but we genuinely want to give ourselves in these exponential ways. And that is costly, because I think Cheryl's point is quite apt. If you start changing the rules, the people who are keeping the rules aren't going to like that. And so if you've got a foot in both camps, the people in the camp, in one camp, are going to go, oh, but he's not one of us, or she's not one of us. So you do pay an incredible cost for doing it the new way, because you don't belong to anyone. You kind of offer yourself to everyone, but you're not on their team. You're on God's team in a sense. And so there's an inherent risk to everybody else and an invitation in it, which is why Jesus, of course, got crucified, because he wasn't with the Jewish leaders, and he wasn't with the Romans, and he wasn't with the crowd in the end. He wasn't even with his disciples. He was inviting them all into a new way that was beyond all of them, which only becomes apparent after his crucifixion. And then I think all this comes alive in their hearts, and you see it burst open in Acts. And yeah, I love that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you very much. And that is, I mean, that is, you know, that phrase "burst open." I think this is actually the Gospel of Mark is a beautiful thing, you know, because it's on the surface it's very simple, and it's also kind of off-putting in its way, because it's very demanding. It's raw. It doesn't pull any punches. It seems in some ways offensive, even, you know, possibly offensive. But then at this point, there seems to be this the ultimately the gospel. Well, the way we began the study, and because we've done it before, is that at the end of the gospel, the man dressed in white tells the women that you have got to go back to Galilee, and there you will meet Jesus, like he said. So the gospel goes in this big circle. I mean, you end up with the empty tomb, but then it says you basically have to go back to where you started and read all this stuff, or go through it all again. So it's kind of like this ongoing, this never-ending kind of training in the gospel. The gospel is this circular thing. We've talked about it before, that you keep going back in order to try to get it at the levels that you're talking about. But then there's also so there's this kind of sense of a labor in the gospel. But then there's this beauty. This begins to break through with the hundredfold here in this passage. So I think there's this wonderful, even though it has no, unless you include the later endings, there is no visible appearance of Jesus in the gospel, of the crucified Jesus. There's a pointing to it. There's an indication that it's going to happen, but it's not depicted. It is not represented in the writing, unless you include the other endings that were by all the scholars agreed that they were added on later. So the gospel is a difficulty there. It's kind of penitential in that sense. But as you keep doing it, as you keep going over it, I think that breakthrough of the risen Christ, that's what it's doing. It's this mystagogia that brings you into a vision of what you could not see before. You were totally unable to see it because you don't have the eyes to see. So they have to be made for you, and they have to be cleansed, as we'll see in the final miracle that happens in the passage we're looking at tonight. There is this miracle of the healing of Bartimaeus, a blind man, that happens right at the end, before the entry to Jerusalem. So it's like suddenly the light breaks through of what this gospel means, but it's always happening at levels that you don't get immediately on the surface of the gospel. And so the gospel is this wonderful exercise, perhaps of all the gospels, even John, there's this wonderful exercise in mystagogia, leading you into the mystery, leading you, say, okay, you can't, if you think you can see it, you don't. If you think you see it, you don't. So you have to keep going back, you have to keep repeating the cycle, and then little by little it's going to break through to you. And I think that's wonderful, you know, that is what's lacking. And even the early church, you know, if Mark is the first and the other gospels come later, the early church backs off that because it's much simpler to have a straightforward catechesis of a risen Jesus, a risen, visible Jesus, and then you have the announcement of the gospel, and it does work. We can see in Paul's letters, but Mark is so radical in that sense. He said, no, you have to follow this pathway in order to get it at the levels that where it's really happening. If you think you know what's happening, then maybe you're wrong. Maybe you're not getting it, but keep going, and that's, if you're on that journey, that's the important thing. So let's look.
Tony, can I just say one last thing, just a small observation, and that is that last week we were talking about how with the rich young man, the disciples' response was, "Well, how hard it will be for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God," and then the disciples said, "Well, in that case, who can be saved?" You know,
right, yeah, right.
And it's almost like this is the other side of the coin,
Right, yeah.
because last week they were saying, well, we're all rich, and yet God is going to bless us, and yet Jesus said, well, God is going to bless you. What is impossible for human beings is possible for God. And then directly afterwards, Peter then says, well, we've given up everything, and then God again blesses. It's like it doesn't. I mean, it was just something that I just noticed, that those sayings are back to back. And
Right.
On the one hand, the disciples are saying we're too rich, and then and then they come out and say we have nothing. You know, we've given up everything.
Gave it up, yeah, yeah.
And yet, in both of them, Jesus points to the grace that overflowing grace of impossible grace of God, you know. I mean, that's what's impossible, is because human beings can't think in terms of never, limitless generosity.
Right.
Because everything we have is the world's economy is different from God's economy, as I said before.
And it's very, very difficult for us to get that other economy. But that's the beauty of the gospel, of all the gospels really in their various ways, is that it's leading you. There's no other documents in human culture that are as revolutionary as this, that are leading you into this other way of being. So that,
and then the prosperity gospel that you talked about earlier, it's like missing the whole point, really, because they're translating it back into the worldly economy.
Recolonizing this new territory but with the old world order.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what a call to discipleship is not to do that, is to follow this endless pathway of growth. But let's read the next sequence all the way through, because then we see where the gospel is going now at this point. So if we read chapter 10, verse 32, all the way through to the end of chapter 10, verse 52. We read 32 to 52, if someone would like to do that. Go ahead, Julie. And your usual David Bentley heart.
Yes. Okay. And they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was leading them, and they were astonished, and those following along were afraid. And again, taking the 12 aside, he began to tell them the things that were about to happen to him. Look, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death, and they will hand him over to the Gentiles, and they will mock him and spit upon him and flog and kill him, and after 3 days he will rise again. And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, approached him, saying to him, Teacher, we wish that you would do for us whatever we might request of you. And he said to them, What do you wish that I might do for you? And they said, Grant to us that in your glory we may sit on your right and one on your left. Sit one on your right and one on your left. But Jesus said to them, You do not know what you ask. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized? And they said to him, We can. And Jesus said to them, You shall drink the cup I drink, and will be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized. But to sit on my right and on my left is not mine to give, but is theirs for whom it has been prepared. And hearing this, the 10 began to be irate about James and John. And summoning them, Jesus says to them, You know that those who are supposed to rule the Gentile peoples dominate them, and that their great men wield power over them. But it is not so among you. Rather, whoever among you wishes to be great will be your servant, and whoever among you wishes to be the first will be the slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his soul as the price of liberation for many. And they came to Jericho. And as he was departing from Jericho, along with his disciples and a considerable crowd, a blind beggar, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, sat beside the road. And hearing that it was Jesus of the Nazarene, he began to cry out and to say, Son of David, Jesus, have mercy on me. And many persons admonished him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And coming to a standstill, Jesus said, Call to him. And they called to the blind man, saying to him, Take heart, arise, he calls to you. So throwing off his mantle and springing up, he came to Jesus. And answering him, Jesus said, What do you wish that I might do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabboni, that I might see again. And Jesus said to him, Go, your faith has healed you. And immediately he saw again and followed him upon the road.
Amen. Thank you very much. Well, the gospel is not without humor. This gospel and John's especially, because they're going to Jerusalem and they've already been arguing about who's going to be the greatest. We see that back chapter 8. When he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? And they were arguing about who's to be the greatest, and now Jesus repeats again this terrifying prospect of what's going to happen to him. And this time, I mean, each time there's 3 predictions of his death, and each time a different element is added. And this element here is going to be handed over to the Gentiles. That means the Romans. That's what it's going to mean. That's what it means. So there's a terror of that, because that it does mean the cross. if the Romans are going to execute you, it's not going to be a stone that's going to hit you on the head and knock you out unconscious. This is going to be a slow, brutal execution. And then after 3 days, he'll rise again. So it gives them this kind of potted, synthetic teaching about the heart of the gospel that's going to happen to Jesus. And once again, show themselves completely impervious to it. Like it's going straight over their heads. So it has to be that the constructed gospel of Mark has a threefold reiteration of this destiny of Jesus in order that the reader will get it. The reader is not going to be able to avoid this. But the disciples had nothing comparable in terms of the insistence that the written gospel makes about Jesus' forthcoming death and terrible suffering. I credit that Jesus did say it, but that they certainly didn't get it is because he didn't din it into them, because that's not his style. He's not insistent. He's leading the way. Now they're going to Jerusalem, so in their minds, as is very evident from the question of James and John, he's going to his glory. He's going to Jerusalem to take charge. And because they have this trust in him, and because he's shown himself to be so powerful, they feel that he can mobilize Jerusalem in some fashion, probably invoke the help of angels, whatever, but he's going to mobilize Jerusalem against the Romans, and he's going to throw them out. And he's going to become the king of Jerusalem. And so they're vying, as they have been up to this point, for position and status next to the forthcoming. It's like, you know, the president, he's going to be the forthcoming president, so you want to stick around him and have him appoint you to a prestigious position in the new administration, you know? And that's what they want. And they haven't heard a thing about his forthcoming execution and death. But this time, Jesus doesn't slap them down as he slapped Peter down when Peter tried to stop him, or when John says earlier on, somebody is casting out demons, shouldn't we stop this person who's in your name? And he's not a follower of ours. He's not following in our group. Shouldn't we stop him, or won't you stop him? And Jesus says, don't stop him. He kind of negates what they say. But here, if I'm not mistaken, he kind of leads them into an acceptance or the possibility that they're going to follow in the same path. And it's a beautiful thing, because he says, well, I can't give you the position that you're asking for, but then are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am going to be baptized with? I'm sure, yet again, they still read those things in terms of maybe some kind of forthcoming battle, but they get through it, whatever, because of their identity with Jesus. But of course, the cup of Jesus that he's going to drink is the cup of the world's violence. That we've understood that before. That's what that cup means, is the cup of human violence. He's going to drink it down and drain it to its dregs, and then be baptized with the baptism. Now, this is very interesting, because Jesus has already been baptized, as indeed probably the disciples, or many of the disciples who are hearing this gospel, but they're offered a kind of second baptism, another baptism Are you able to be baptized, to be immersed in this thing I'm going to be immersed in? And they say, yeah, sure, that's fine. Let's get on with it, you know? Let's do it. And then he says, the cup that I drink, you will drink. And with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. So he's integrating them. At this point in the gospel, there's no distance anymore between Jesus' destiny and the destiny of his disciples. And it's very beautiful. And if you think of when this gospel was written, sometime around 66, something like that, if we look at the Acts of the Apostles, it's chapter 12, I think. Look at chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. It says, what does it say there? Chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. If anybody's got that. Well, you got it. Thank you, Gail.
Then he began to speak to them in parables.
No. Acts chapter 12. Acts chapter 12.
Oh, Acts.
I've leapt forward to give an indicate to show something here. By the way, hi Heather.
No. Maybe somebody else does. All right, I've got it. What is it? Acts 1?
Acts 12, verse 1 and 2. Thank you.
All right, 12, 1 and 2. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah. About that time, King Herod laid violent hands upon some who belonged to the church. He had James, the brother of John, killed with the sword.
All right, so this is the James that we're talking, that said to Jesus at this point in the gospel, make sure that I'm on your right or left hand. And Jesus says, no, I can't tell you, I can't give that to you, but will you do the same thing as I did? And he does. And according to the historians, this is in the year 44, pretty soon after the first announcement of the gospel, after Jesus' death. So if the Gospel of Mark is written around about 66, this is 22 years later, and James is already long dead, long executed by Herod. And I would think that if John had the same character as James, which he obviously does, that unless he went through some remarkable transformation that we do not hear about, he would have suffered the same fate as James, which is a kind of sidebar, which makes me think that the beloved disciple of John's gospel is not the same as John, the son of Zebedee, because James must have said something. He must have been very outspoken and annoyed a lot of people, and so Herod had him killed with impunity, basically, because he'd upset a lot of people. I don't think John, his brother, would have been any different. So either John went off into hiding and had a long mystagogy of his own to change, or he met something of the same fate. But he doesn't fit the bill of the beloved disciple who leaned upon Jesus's breast at the Last Supper. He's too fiery. He's too ambitious. So that's just a matter of questioning of that church tradition about the identity of the beloved disciple. But be that as it may, Jesus is saying that you are going to follow the same path. So obviously, some disciples did get it. Had by that point when the gospel is being written, they had followed this thing through to its conclusions as martyrs. I mean, that's the destiny of someone standing up against the character of Rome and the world as it stands, that you're going to end up being killed by it. And Jesus is saying this is going to happen to these two, which also, incidentally, as another sidebar, goes against, I mean, we said this before, goes against atonement theory, whereby only Jesus can drink up the cup of the Father's wrath or whatever it is. But here, no, everybody's going to drink it, but precisely because it is an issue of human, but it's this issue of the violence of the world, not of God's demanding compensation for human sin, which is this kind of awful theory that has dominated the church for so long. No, this is to do with human violence that all Jesus' followers are going to have to contend with. This is what Mark's gospel is confronting. And we know that then very clearly because verse 41 onwards, he makes an explicit distinction. But who are you waving at?
David's just saying he has other things. He has to go. He has to leave.
Oh,
so
I see.
we're just
Okay.
leaving.
All right, David. Love you. Thank you very much. Peace. Yeah. He makes an explicit distinction between the anthropology of the Gentiles, the way the Gentiles work, and the anthropology of the kingdom and those who are following Jesus. So I'll just read that bit again. When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. I mean, it's multiplying itself mimetically, this rivalry and this ambition. So Jesus called them and said to them, you know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants, oppressors. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So at this point, the God, as well as the inviting those disciples into this destiny of following Jesus, Jesus makes it absolutely explicit that the order of human relations that he's introducing is the inverse of the order of relations among the nations, the Gentiles, who are founded on generative violence. So nothing could be more explicit in the gospel than that you are a new kind of humanity. Go ahead, Linda.
Well, the first thing was that when you look back at the passages where Jesus does foretell his death and his declarations about his death and resurrection, they are all either followed or preceded and followed by the disciples misunderstanding what like the first one, there's it's followed by the transfiguration when they're trying to put booths up on the mountainside for him,
right?
And also the rebuke of Peter, obviously, yeah. And then the second one is immediately followed by the who is the greatest discussion by the disciples, and the third one now is followed by the request of James and John to be on his left and his right. And when I think of that, in his glory, I'm thinking immediately of John's gospel, and where the glory of Jesus is when he's lifted up on the cross, and on the left and the right are the two crucified, the men who are crucified with him, on his left and his right. So that's what Jesus is thinking about when they're asking that.
Sorry?
I knew you weren't listening to me.
I am listening to you, otherwise I wouldn't have said sorry.
Well, that was it. I mean, basically, that was it. That's all I had to say.
Well, thank you, Linda. I mean, you're saying that the disciples.
Well, when I just feel like
there's a misunderstanding of what Jesus is doing every time Jesus announces what's going to happen to him. Yes.
Yeah, at each of those occasions, the three prophecies, I never really saw it quite as clearly as this evening. That each one, the gospel writer frames it makes that they're directly before a massive misunderstanding by the disciples each case.
Yeah,
and
right.
and then the lifting up to be on his right and his left hand. Now I'm obviously in that context, it's got to be on the cross. There's the image of the three crosses, on the left and on the right of him. That's what Jesus is talking about, but it's very different from what the James and John are talking about.
Right. So there's this huge contrast, and that is almost the driving principle of Mark's gospel, is to set up that contrast and to persuade the community of this other ethic, shall we say, or this other anthropology. Go ahead, Ruben.
No, I just wanted to echo what I heard Linda saying. I had never thought about it that way, in that the James and John are asking Jesus to promise them, a position of authority and high regard and almost glamour, worldly glamour.
Oh yeah, right.
But the glamour that Jesus is talking about in his kingdom is what Linda was referencing, almost like a place substitute the other two criminals on the cross and their torturous execution. That's what Linda was saying, his glory.
Yeah, because when I first read this, and it says, Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. When I first heard that, I thought, well, he's saying they're so presumptuous, they don't really understand. This is in God's hands, glory is, depends on what you do with your life, etc., etc. But actually, when you read it in light of the cross, specifically the cross, Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. You don't want that. You really do not want that, I mean, in some ways, but you're going to get it. You are going to get that. So it's a very different, I guess it was a different take on Jesus's response, is what I'm saying, and what Ruben's saying.
What you're saying is that Jesus is promising them the same destiny as himself, even though at that point they don't have the foggiest idea that's what's going to happen.
That's right. I mean, they're not on the same wavelength, but Jesus can see it coming.
Yeah.
Coming, and that they will, in fact, do all those things. Yeah.
So, what about the contrast between among the Gentiles and among you? Among the nations, the Gentiles, the Romans, they're all substitutes for each other, and among you.
Well, I think Jesus is responding to their kind of desire for power, I mean, he's saying that's not what this is about. The Christians aren't, that my followers are not about, if you go into it, I mean, he said that so many times in the gospel so far.
Yeah.
The first shall be last, the last shall be first, and the little child and all this. It's just one more way of saying the same thing.
So what does that say? I mean, just like standing back for a moment, what does that say about the gospel writer? He's not talking about contemplation of the word, the eternal word, which you might take from John's gospel, and the being close to the beloved, the one who's closest to the Father, this unity with God, or Luke's gospel about the poor, and which we'll see a bit of in a minute. He's talking about worldly structures. This is what Mark is concerned with. do we feel that? Do we kind of see that that Mark is talking to the Christian community about its anthropological character? How are you to organize yourself among yourselves? Go ahead, Ruben.
No, I think it was someone else first. Mac, was it?
Oh, well, I could say that we should organize ourselves so that those who have strengths and abilities can serve others when they need that kind of service.
Right. And that is the character of being in the community, is to be at the service of the other. Not so it strikes me is that, I mean, it's a possible scenario. No, Ruben, you had something to say. Go ahead.
No, I was saying that I was having difficulty, I still do, with verse 42. And it was, and I kept reading it, and then the whole time I've read this one before, I always thought he was referencing the Romans lording it over them on the Jews, but it's not.
No.
He talked about Gentile on Gentile.
Yes, exactly right.
So it's so what are some examples of that? Like slavery, indentured servanthood,
and the
abuse,
civil wars among
exploitation.
The Romans. It's Caesar taking over the Republic, becoming Caesar, and then Augustus Caesar becoming the emperor, and the emperor has a right basically to do what he likes. I mean, it's the way of the world that Jesus is challenging. Right? I mean, if you read it from a kind of pious perspective, is that Christians should be humble. Christians should be at the service of other people. But he's actually talking about a completely different way. He says, because these guys are arguing among themselves about who's to be greatest, he says, this is the way of the Gentiles who do not have God's revelation. They do not have the God of the covenant or my Father. They don't know about God. But the Son of Man came in order to show that character of God, and he does so by serving and by giving his life in order that others might live. That they may, and that they, in that process, they may be bought back out, they may be ransomed from the world system, not ransomed from God, but from the world system. That they actually be brought out of the world system in order to live this other life. But so it just strikes me as the gospel is progressively opened up now into more explicit understanding of really what Jesus is trying to bring about. You see what I mean? Like beforehand, there's this mystery of what he's doing. And he's casting out demons, that's right. And he's talking about bread. He's multiplying bread. It's all very great and cool. But now he's actually saying explicitly, I'm trying to create a new community. Go ahead, Claire.
I'm just wondering too whether, when I looked at verse 42, I thought this was really quite prescient of Mark, or the gospel writer, to be able to see how the current system was structured.
Yes, yes, yes. That's what I'm trying to. Yeah.
How, which means dominating others,
right,
is the source of all authority. And I was thinking, even today, a lot of people, I think we do not recognise our structures for being as dominating and violent as they are. So it's something to be able to see the structures in which you're living, and I thought that was quite prophetic in a way. Or
no, well, it's both prophetic on the part of the writer and then prophetic on the part of Jesus. I'm sure there has to be something in that Jesus was actually trying to do that, teach a different way. But the point that you're making is that it's structural. It's not spiritual in the sense of, well, you know, if you want to be a good person, you should be humble. Well, yes, there's truth in that. But he's saying, I want you to live an entirely different kind of life from the way the world lives, and to be that in the world. Go ahead, Dan.
I've been troubled by a difficulty in balancing two ideas. For human beings, it's impossible to be saved. For human beings, it's impossible. So, but all things are possible for God.
Amen.
Now, Mark is being pretty, he, like you say, he's uncompromising, and he's a bit scary for me.
He is a bit scary, or she, whoever wrote the gospel.
But what's the point? Because it's impossible for us to kind
Well, hang on, Dan. Hang on. It's impossible, but that doesn't mean to say it's not going to happen. It's impossible in the way the world stands. If we think about it as impossible in some kind of divine or metaphysical way, that only God, by God's direct action, can change, yes, it's kind of pointless in a way. But if what Jesus is doing is introducing this germ of novelty, of new humanity into the bloodstream, so that's what I think, that's what I take that to mean. This is not a matter of metaphysical impossibility that can only be changed by God's direct metaphysical. God is actually sending his son, the Son of Man, to be a ransom, to get us out of this by interjecting this other thing, this baptism with which you will be baptized. So beforehand, so baptism changes the order of your existence. It does so in a very ordinary physical way. When you go into the water, you are submerged in the water, you stand up, you can do it in the sea anytime you like, and it for a moment, it feels very different. You're underwater, then you're out. Of course, when you're plunged into the water in baptism, it's very deliberate. It's a physical symbol of this totally new life. But what the promise of another baptism, you will be baptized with the baptism with which I'm going to be baptized, means to say that you're going to get this new existence. That's what I take from those words. And so that virus or that germ is introduced into the human system, that we are already changed. You are already changed. We are already in this other way, but we keep having to go over it because we're trying to recover from the old way. This is a treatment that is recovering us from the old way.
I guess the question is, it's certainly not going to be what I'm getting from what you're saying and what I'm trying to get from Mark. It's not a matter of our effort. This kind of getting through the eye of the needle. It's not about sort of forcing our way through.
No, I think you're right.
It's about sort of being.
I think you're right.
It's about being in discipleship.
Yes.
For long enough.
Yes.
That seed gets planted.
Yes, exactly right. And seed is,
he takes over.
Yes.
That his spirit becomes replaces the human energies that we start out with.
Yes.
In this journey.
Yeah, that's the nature of the gospel. That's absolutely the case. Yeah. And the seed image is very appropriate because the seed is just a tiny little grain of something that you could miss, but that it has this potential to develop a whole new life. And that is what's occurring. So, I mean, it's very good that you come up against that barrier of the impossibility, That's what the gospel is saying. Yes, don't be over confident about this because you're human, or you have a certain humanity, a certain style of humanity or system of humanity from archaic times, from the origins, but now this new humanity has been introduced into the world, and that's the point. You see, it's not a matter of system of virtues in order that you can get to heaven. This is an injection of a radically destabilizing and transformative element into human relations, and that's why Mark is scary, and that's why I kind of like him or her, is because it holds that tension all the way through. Except right now, it's actually opening up a little bit.
It strikes me that it's not a matter of our becoming Christ-like, because no one can be that.
No.
So we bring our human nature.
Yes.
Never kind of leave it behind. And so
I don't think so. But the point is, you bring it. You bring that nature to the journey.
Well,
and it's very characteristic that they're on this journey. I mean, they're getting to Jerusalem.
They're following Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that was, I think, in the last section, I think I wanted to defend the fact that all we can do is follow him.
Yeah.
We can't necessarily kind of get out in front of him. We can't or get ahead of the transformation that he's working in us.
I think that's correct.
All we can do is kind of be standing when he's working his teaching, his sharing his spirit, his teaching us to forgive, and things that don't come easily to our.
They're totally unnatural. They don't belong to the order of things. You know how it is among the Gentiles, and it makes that distinction. But then he doesn't say then among the chosen people. He says among you. It's not to be that way. So he's establishing this other way of being in the community, and I find it very liberating. You know, that you should say that. Now, there's this passage here. There's two things to learn about the last passage here that we're going to look at today, and it's great. So if you bear in mind the last healing with of sight, so where was that? Who is the greatest? Okay, so it's chapter 8, verse 22 through to verse 25. So if someone could read that, go back to chapter 8 now and read that.
I can read it if you like.
Okay, so this comes before the first proclamation of his death. So what's happening here? And then Peter's confession that in the positive sense, you are the Christ. So it comes just before that. Go ahead.
They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had put saliva on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Can you see anything?" And the man looked up and said, "I can see people, but they look like trees walking." Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he looked intently. and his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Then he sent him away to his home, saying, "Do not even go into the village."
All right. So this healing of a blind man happens in 2 stages. And the first time he just sees things, he sees people like trees. This is vague kind of objects moving around. Now, Linda, if you read again, chapter 10, verses 46, and through to the end of the chapter.
They came to Jericho, and as he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout and say, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." So throwing off his cloak, he sprang up, and he came to Jesus. Then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." Immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way.
Thank you, Linda. So these are 2 sequential instances of the healing of blind man. There's the only blind healings in the gospel. What is the difference between these 2 healings?
So in the first one, it was in sort of stages.
Right.
And then he says at the end, don't go back to the village. He's sort of halfway, I guess. It's not quite. Where's this
don't
one?
tell anybody, don't even go back to the village.
Yeah. Well, this one,
and in this one,
there's nothing like that. He just follows him directly.
Right.
And
now,
the Bartimaeus is actually asking for his sight,
Right. He asks for his sight. How does he address Jesus?
Rabbi, Rabboni.
Yes.
Dear Rabbi.
That's right. The same words that Mary Magdalene used to Jesus when she saw him after the resurrection. So there's obviously something's happened between the first healing and the second in terms of the stages. This is in respect of what Dan is saying about we can only follow, but the following has progressed. If you see that as a series of images of healing of sight, how have they progressed?
Well, the first one, he was just sort of sees people like trees walking.
Yeah, that's right.
And then and also Jesus is putting mud on his eyes and things like that. Whereas he just says your faith has made you well.
In verse 22 of chapter 8, it says, some people brought a blind man to him and begged him. So this guy doesn't come of his own volition as such.
The second Bartimaeus has faith. He says your faith has made you well.
That's right. And go ahead, Gail.
Well, I just want to say the first man is never seen before, and the second man is regaining his sight. And that seems to me significant because it's as though there's a kind of progression in seeing that's suggested here, so that it's as though you can partially see, but you see really through a glass darkly.
That's right.
And it takes a constant renewal of faith to really see clearly.
Yes, that's right. And it's also no accident that he's getting near to Jerusalem. And he's, you know, the gospel has prepared us. So if you think this is happening at least two levels, at the level of the story and the level of the reader. So the reader, if the reader is identifying with the characters as we go through, he can be like the man with the son, the epileptic son. He said, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief." So so you're moving forward, but the blind Bartimaeus, he calls out to Jesus of his own volition. He's not brought by anybody else. And what happens? The crowd try to shut him up. So he doesn't have the crowd on his side. He is on his own. And why did the crowd try to shut him up? Why do you think? I mean, we don't know, but I mean, why do you think they might try to shut him up?
Well, he's a blind beggar on the side of the road.
He's a blind beggar, that's right. He's worth nothing.
Yeah.
But he also says, what does he say?
Jesus, son of David.
Son of David. And son of David is a messianic name. He's the son of the king. And he's going towards Jerusalem. This can have no other meaning than he's the Messiah or a messianic pretender. But, go ahead.
So, I mean, there's this little interesting kind of funny thing in here because when he first starts calling out, the crowd tries to shut him up, and then Jesus will bring him here, and the crowd said, "Oh, go," you know, and so it's like they just turn from shut up to, "Oh, you better go now," because you know, that's that little chorus in the background that says, "Well, since Jesus says he wants to see you, then we'll pay attention to you also."
Yeah, right. And that's at the level of the story itself, but at the level of the reader, we can see it working, that you're encouraged to go to Jesus and also to call out to him as the Messiah, knowing that he's now prophesied 3 times that this Messiah is going to suffer. So this is the beginning of chapter 11. Jesus is moving into Jerusalem. So the moment you get to chapter 11, the last phases and the drama of his life, the final act of his life, to Act 5, is now going to unfold. So this is the very last thing that happens before that final act of the gospel. And so you're brought as a reader to a moment where you were invited to call out to Jesus as Son of David, as Messiah, which is what Peter had called Jesus in chapter 8, after that episode, chapter 8, just before that episode of the blind man of Bethsaida. Oh no, sorry, just before so that took place just before Peter's declaration of Jesus as the Christ. But Peter doesn't want him to be Christ as a suffering Christ, and he says, "Don't go to Jerusalem to suffer." That you can't do that. But this man, presumably, or in the narrative, is presented as somebody who recognizes the messianic character of Jesus, that his eyes are directly opened, and that as we're reading the gospel, our eyes are being opened. I mean, that's the point. That's the point of these different stories, or these stories progressing, that our eyes are opening to this completely different way, this germ of novelty in the world. Reuben.
Yes, so even though he's blind, he can see, right, who Jesus is.
Right.
And the authority that he has to heal.
Right.
And just like you mentioned earlier, the reference to verse 42, that the Gentiles lorded over them, his request is the opposite of lording it over another, but it's having mercy
Right.
on him. So it's the opposite.
Yes.
Jesus does do that.
Right. It does. That's right. Now, if one very interesting sidelight on this is that if you compare this, so if you hold that passage there right at the end of chapter 10, before entry to Jerusalem at Bethany, if you compare this with Luke chapter 19, if you go to chapter 19 of Luke, you have exactly the same episode. Chapter 19, verse 1, he entered Jericho. It's the same place. But the story, and then afterwards, there's one parable. There's a parable at pounds, and then they enter Jerusalem. So the miracle in Luke takes place exactly at the same point in the narrative. But this time, it's not blind Bartimaeus, it's Zacchaeus. In Luke, the story is about Zacchaeus.
Interesting.
It's very interesting because it shows, I mean, if you read that, Zacchaeus is a tax collector who's despised and hated by his compatriots. And then he promises to give half his wealth to the poor and pay back 4 times, which is over the limit, anybody he's defrauded. So it shows Luke's concern for social and economic justice. That is what's driving, so that you can see the different dynamics in the gospel, what they're taking from the story of Jesus. They're very compatible, of course. The way that the rulers of this world lord it over others is also a matter of social economic injustice. They're going to be much wealthier, much richer, much more powerful, all the rest of it. But that's where Luke is focused. But where Mark is focused, and you tend to lose it because you just see, well, Mark is the preparatory gospel, and it's really Matthew and Luke who are more sophisticated, and they see the inner working of the gospel in terms of Luke, social justice, and Matthew teaching about the nature of the Christian community, that kind of thing. But what is, if you compare those two things and says, well, Luke is concerned with Zacchaeus paying back, but also being rehabilitated, brought back into the community, is very rich that way. But what is Mark focusing on with blind Bartimaeus, from everything we said before? If the 2 miracles happen at the same place at the same time, they're variant stories.
I think it's because of what you were saying about the reader, and it's being a catechetical gospel. It's
Right.
a gospel that's teaching and leading a new Christian.
Yes.
And so you read it, you go through it, and then when you get to the end, you go back to the beginning. And so it's that blindness that, of the message of the gospel,
right,
that you're talking about. So it's really focusing in on the understanding of the gospel message and being blind to it, and then being able to see it in
Right.
Mark's gospel. So Mark is more focused on the actual charisma of the kingdom, whereas Luke is bringing in his social
his concern,
his he's always advocating for the poor and
he is
the sort of sick and all that sort of stuff.
Right. Dan, thank you, Linda.
There is one sentence which I would love to hear you kind of do a little exegesis of, and that's verse 45.
Which
In Mark chapter 10.
Yeah, right.
So that for me is a kind of a all important. If I get nothing out of tonight's session, but a very clear understanding of that sentence, I would be delighted.
Well, far be it from me to withhold delight from you, Dan. I would love to delight you. The answer, I think, if it's possible to do, in a nutshell, belongs to the whole sequence of what we've been talking about in Mark's gospel. You can't take that verse in isolation from what's just come before it and what's coming after it. And what's just come before it is that you're not to be like the Gentiles are, like the Romans are, in terms of power structure. You're to invert that, because the Son of Man, he came to do that. So the Son of Man came to overturn the power structures of the world. That's the way I would gloss that serve bit, and then gloss the ransom bit as the same thing. Because if you overturn the power structures of the world, then we are all ransomed out of those structures. We are in them up to our necks and up to our brains as well. And like you say, you know, it's a long journey to get out of that. And to get ransomed from that, to get bought out of it by, I mean, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for a transaction, but it's not a transaction as such. Where something is, that's what what's used to bother the patristic writers on this. To whom was the ransom paid? Because if it was paid to the devil, that's unrighteous. That's not right. You know, the devil doesn't. Nothing is due to the devil because he's a deceiver. But that's not the point of the metaphor. The point of the metaphor is the getting back, is getting us out, and what gets us out of it is not an amount paid to pay off an owner, but something introduced into the system that deconstructs the system itself. So we are ransomed out of it by that. So it would be like, I mean, if you had cancer and you took a course of treatment that perhaps wasn't as brutal as chemotherapy, something like genetic, I don't know, some genetic therapy, and it got rid of the cancer, you would be ransomed out of that by that process. I mean, it makes perfect sense. You've got out of this death-dealing system. You got out of death. So if you take it all, and that's what's remarkable about Mark, is that he's not concerned like Luke is. I mean, I'd be interested to see what Matthew does with it. He probably has blind Bartimaeus there. But anyway, he doesn't do what Luke does with it, because Luke is talking about the time of Luke talks about the time of the Gentiles. At the end of his gospel, he says, this Jerusalem is going to suffer and be trodden underfoot until the time of the Gentiles is ended. So Luke somehow recognizes an ongoing period of history when the Gentiles, the way of the Gentiles, runs the world. So Luke is more in some ways conformed or compromised, shall we say, even with the world system. But what he does as that goes forward, he radicalizes the message of the poor. So So you could say that Luke is something of a social democrat. You know, Luke is a socialist, if you want to say, because he wants to transform the economic structures. But Mark is more of a Girardian, because he goes to the heart of the issue, which is the way power is used violently. It comes from violence and is used violently, and it necessarily causes oppression. It's going to oppress somebody. So Mark, even though he doesn't spell it out in any kind of sophisticated way, you can see, if you read it this way, this sequence of dealing with demons, the Gerasene demoniac, the sea, the water, and then the way of the Gentiles, you can see he's trying to overturn the violent structure of the world, or he sees that's what Jesus is doing.
Well, thank you. I find this one sentence to be sort of maybe the key for my understanding, and that is I wanted to understand that understanding of service as a revelation of a different way of being human. And
exactly right, and a different understanding of God, because God sends
exactly
the Son of Man, because that is the character of God.
So I think I begin to get it, but I wasn't really even hoping to really understand this, but I think that this sentence has helped me enormously, so thank you.
Well, it is a pivotal sentence, and it has been read as in atonement terms. But it's nothing to.
And it also explains a bit why the disciples would naturally be clueless at this point. I mean, you know, this is such a revolutionary. This service, the final service that Jesus offers, this demonstration of what it means to be nonviolent in a violent world. That's
amazing, Dan. That is the service.
Yeah. So without that demonstration, without their beloved teacher, sort of what's the right word? Enacting that service, it is. I'm much less critical of the disciples' sort of inability to understand, because
nobody understands. I mean, how, you know, Thomas Aquinas didn't understand until the end. I think, you know, that he understood that this is basically revolutionary in the way the world works.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Gail.
I just want to say that the sentence that sticks out for me is repeated in not just in Mark, but also in Luke when he tells this story. And it's that question, what do you want me to do for you?
Right.
And I think that's the crucial question. What, of all Christians, what do we want?
Yeah, well, there you go.
What Jesus to do for us? And then the answer is James and John do. You know, make me great.
Yes, that's right. Make America great.
Yeah, but help me see clearly.
Right. Thank you.
Those are beautiful stories.
That is absolutely. Help me see, because my eyes are weak.
Yes, and I used to see, but now I don't. And I love that idea of trees walking.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All you can see, it seems, you know, they say that you have to teach people who regain their sight what they're seeing.
Yeah, oh, really? Yeah.
And it seems very authentic.
So if Mark is a progression of seeing, that kind of speeds up a little bit at this point. I mean, it's like, as Dan says, the disciples are clueless, but then they are promised to be baptized with the baptism of Jesus. And we already know that James has done that 20 years earlier. So they already have the witness, the revelation that human beings other than Jesus can do this and do it. They go the whole way, and they manifest exactly. They don't do it with the perfection of Jesus, but they do it with the light of Jesus in them, so we see that. So they already have that before them. So what Mark is doing is laying out this pathway for people, for disciples and readers to get this, to recognize at first they don't see, or they see people like trees, vague, fuzzy outlines, and then, oh yeah, help me to see, my dear Lord, Rabuni, help me to see, and then Jesus does say, follow me, come into Jerusalem with me, you're ready.
But it is a process.
It is a process, and that is the beauty of the gospel. And I think when we study Paul, we see that he also went through a process, no doubt about it. Even from he didn't get it all at once, no doubt about it. He went through a process that changed him as he went forward. So thank you everyone, and thank you all those who've attended silently but attentively to the study. Thank you so much for being here and contributing with your spirit to this journey. So would someone like to